Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Debra and Peter are doing a podcast with my lovely twinny Peter Wanless, who's looking particularly bright and colourful today. Hello, Peter. How have you been?
Good afternoon. Yeah, very well. Thank you. The county cricket season is underway. I watched Tom Banton score the highest individual score by a Somerset player ever in the whole history of the game. 371, and then in true Somerset fashion, we couldn't quite win the game. So for those people who are sceptical about cricket, the game played absolutely into that cliche that how can you play for 4 days and end up being a draw, which is how it did, because we just couldn't take the final wicket. But I had a lovely time being presidential down in Taunton for the start of the season. And yes, long may the sun continue to shine.
Long may it continue to shine. And actually, it's really lovely because, listeners, Peter and I normally only see each other over the airwaves, you know, when we do our podcast, and we haven't had much chance to catch up in person. But actually, we saw each other. We went to a lecture that's being hosted by Stone King, who are the lawyers, and with a very esteemed panel, I have to say, of, you know, incredibly important, super clever people. And we managed to get to see each other in real life and, Peter, meet some of our listeners.
I know, that was funny, wasn't it? It was nice to bump into people and say that they'd heard this or that or the other on the podcast and offer us a few suggestions of things to talk about. And yeah, I mean, it was a sort of there was a panel discussion about challenges for the sector, wasn't there? And people were desperately trying to find some things to be cheerful about, and didn't do too badly. I did leave with a kind of sense of if not us, then who?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of kindred spirits in the room, and I think we were all inspired, weren't we, by the Stone King apprentices?
Oh, they were amazing. Yeah, so those who weren't there, these were two, I hesitate to say young people, because one of them had a full career in the army, actually, and so was an apprentice at an older age, which just reminded me that apprenticeship isn't necessarily about youth. It's about moving into different fields and be given the opportunity. And they came from very different backgrounds. And, you know, one of them in particular from a quite challenging background and some real, you know, challenges to get into law and a lot of blockages along the way. And Stone King, of course, had this wonderful approach of just come on, we'll help you sort of thing. And that was super inspiring about what's possible. So any listeners thinking of a change of career, which I have to say, lots and lots and lots I've been chief execs I've been talking to lately have been very seriously considering a career outside of the voluntary sector with all of the challenges we're currently facing. It can be done. But, you know, unless you're absolutely at the end of your tether, don't leave us. We need good people to stay running charities, especially when things are tough, don't we, Peter?
Definitely, and there were some real, as I say, if not us, then who, sense of you know, the passion and the commitment of the people in the room and the opportunities that we can achieve despite rather than necessarily accelerated by some of the forces beyond the room. That's I left feeling hopeful and encouraged and wanting to be part of something. Not quite sure exactly what, but
me too. Although
here to help.
Yeah, although there was one remark, and I'm not sure. I can't actually remember who said it now, and I'm not entirely sure whether it was an off the cuff sarcastic remark or if the person genuinely meant it. But that old chestnut about there being too many charities, which always presses all of my buttons, because I think when people say that, they're completely misunderstanding the nature of voluntary endeavour. They're seeing it as a transactional thing, like a charity is set up to solve a problem and you chuck money at it and that's the end of it. But for me, that isn't what charitable endeavour is about at all. Of course, causes matter and people donate to causes and they volunteer for causes. But actually, the whole principle of charitable endeavour is about getting people off their little sorry, self-pitying backsides and coming together in service of something that they think is important, that matters. And what that does is that enables you to understand that there's a wider society and wider issues and wider things going on. And that's how society is improved, by people actually being engaged. I mean, I'm not dismissing the people who just send a check, because, you know, obviously as charities, the cheque is always useful, but a cheque is a transactional thing. I'm going to give you some money to do your work. Whereas when you set up small charities, what you do is, having set up one myself, is you engage all your mates and you knock on your neighbours' doors and you involve a whole load of people who otherwise would not be thinking about engaging in charitable endeavour. And then there's the other thing about it, which is also, quite apart from the obvious stuff, like who the hell would police it? Like who decides how many charities there should be? Who decides what makes them small and what makes them not small? And all that will happen is that people will just say, okay, I'm not allowed to be a charity because I don't fit the criteria. I'll just become an unregistered charity, of which I don't know, it's hard to identify because they're unregistered, but estimates are at least 250,000 unregistered groups, all of which I'm sure wonderful, but we have no opportunity for scrutiny. There's no accountability. All sorts of scams and things could be going on because there isn't the regulation that you get in the charity sector. And then my final point about it really is that, because lots of people bang on about mergers, and sure, mergers where mergers work, if it's the right reasons, although why don't you very often hear about successful mergers? Because very often the merger conversations collapse during the middle of the process for all sorts of perfectly good reasons. But what I've noticed is that the charity register, Peter, I don't know if you're aware of this, is incredibly stable. So over the last sort of 50 years, it doesn't really shift very much in the total number. I mean, some years there might be slightly fewer and some years slightly less, but on average it stays very stable. And that's including all those charities that have merged. Because, of course, what happens is the charities that merge, they create a space for a smaller local group. And so what happens is somebody says, right, there isn't a small local group for this particular area of health or young people, whatever, so we'll set one up. And so even if you can't even reduce the number of charities by getting charities to merge to become single charities, all that happens is new groups come up. And that's because human beings want to help, they want control, they want to feel local, and they want to be part of their community. So I say, 1,000 flowers blooming, Peter. For me, that's a way more effective way of making the world a better place than gigantic monolithic charities determining, never mind about choice. There's only allowed to be one children's charity in the whole of Britain. What happens if you don't like that children's charity and you've got no choice then? You can't donate to it, you can't volunteer for it. It's just a nonsense. We say consumers have choice, but somehow we don't offer the same privileges to donors and volunteers.
Yeah.
You can't have choice because we've decided. Anyway, there you go. That's me ranting away about people who say there are too many charities. There aren't. Not enough, probably.
Yeah, I think at the heart of our charity, at the heart of our sector, are a whole collection of kind of passions and motivations and desires for people to get up and make a difference. And if you stifle that by putting any barriers of entry, you're killing something. I suppose there are two counter arguments that I can see that might have prompted where this person was coming from, and I may be being charitable in making these, but one is that sometimes charities are created for the wrong reasons. They're created to support individual egos.
Yes, that's
people
true.
Who want to be seen to be doing something good and do want to play their own furrow, rather than join some people who really know what they're doing and use their ego in kind of collective endeavour to accelerate something that is already happening really well and could happen even better. So I think that's one way in which things might be tidied up a little bit. And the other is around you don't have to merge to come together to achieve something really powerful. So I was extremely humbled to be called out from the top table by Paul Farmer, who was the chief executive of Mind, about a big lottery fund award which we made to Time to Change.
Yes, I remember it well.
Back in the day. And that was thinking less about an individual charity and more about a big problem. How do we address the attitudes which people have to those with mental health problems? And by focusing on the big challenge, or one might say the mission, and then allying a whole lot of people, big and small, together to do more than they could achieve on their own. I think that was an exciting way of making a difference. So actually, we created a charity, one more on top of all the others, but in order to be an orchestrator and an enabler of other people's activities, rather than saying you must all merge and have exactly the same, terms of reference. And
well, also you've done it really well in your role at NSPCC, Peter, because you were. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you were one of the driving forces behind the major children charities coming together to collaborate to create change.
Yes, certainly the larger ones were working. We did put some effort into trying to think about what we could do with one another. Partly actually in order to avoid the government picking us off, one from the other, because if you all come together and say the same thing rather than saying the same thing in slightly different words, so you can be told that you're not agreeing with one another, that's a problem. And the one might argue, well, why can't you just have one big charity? Because then you'd only need one HR department and one operations department and one finance director. But the roots of the focus of the charities are significantly different. So the Children's Society began with the Church of England. The NSPCC is focused specifically on child protection, child abuse and neglect. I mean, I always felt if we could draw on one another's strengths and amplify the best things that one another were doing and celebrate what one another were doing, that was likely to achieve far more than collapsing it all down into a single entity, which isn't to say there aren't shared services that more than one charity can draw on. There may be some action there which might increase the overall effectiveness of the effort going into supporting children. But that leads us quite nicely onto, I saw you'd had another you've already had another rant today about efficiency savings in charities, and so I was stumbling over my words a little bit there, because I was trying not to say if these large charities shared services with one another, they would become more efficient.
Although that's my point, would they though, Peter? I wonder, because especially if you're a very large charity, I find it very hard to see how you could have one finance director who's got to juggle the competing priorities. And of course, all charities are different. The way in which they report stuff is different. The way in which they use their money is different. So I'm not so sure about the shared back office services. I think shared buildings for sure. I think possibly shared HR at a push, but finance I find a bit more challenging. But no, yeah, I got really wound up, and I don't blame OXFAM for this at all. But there was an article in, I think it was Civil Society Media, possibly it was at Third Sector, I forget, today, basically talking about OXFAM facing, I think it's an over £16 million loss. Compared to, I think it's about 12 million they lost last year. And as a result of that, they're putting a number of people at risk of redundancy. And they'd also said in their statement something about we're going to find efficiencies or something. And it was that efficiency word that really pressed all my buttons.
Yes.
Because the problem is when we say things like this, when we say we're going to be more efficient, the implication is that we're not. The implication is that we're carelessly just like chucking money about without paying any attention to where it goes, without looking at how we do stuff. Now, I personally, I can't talk particularly for very large charities, whereas you probably could, Peter, and I'm sure there are inefficiencies in every side of charity. Of course there are, because it's human beings, it's processes, it's, stuff we're learning all the time. But in small charities, they can't afford to be inefficient. They're literally watching every single bloody penny. Small charities I've visited, they've got battered old chairs. They've got laptops, which Steve Allman I found very funny, who's a charity chap on LinkedIn, who describes the laptops as having claimed their pension. They're that old. You know what I mean? It's like there just isn't inefficiency in that level, although there's sure to be waste. And the implication when we use the word finding efficiencies, it looks as if we're not running it well. And so I really hate us using that word. And I want us to tell the truth. I want us to say we're cutting costs because we haven't got enough money to pay for all the things we need in order to do our work. And those cost cuts are going to result in services being cut back, vital, essential resources. It's like, you might have a finance team of 10 because you've got a massive charity with a lot of money to manage. It's not going to be more efficient to reduce that to 8 when you've actually got more chance of things being misposted, of slippages in the system, of stuff not being reconciled right and stuff like that. So I really want the whole sector to stop talking about finding efficiencies and just tell the truth. What you're doing is you're trimming down to survive so that you can keep on providing services and so that you're still there when the economy or when the funding environment improves. So, that was my rant today.
The trouble is, it is inefficient to be working on a laptop that is claiming its pension. It is inefficient to be muddling along, trying on the same old systems and in the same old ways to do the same old things which people have been doing into the past. And so I think that attitude taken to the extreme can be quite triggering to business-minded people who are looking at how can we make the very best from every pound which is donated to us.
Yeah, but you make choices, Peter, don't you? I mean, we've got José, our chap, a lovely chap listening in who manages and edits our podcast. And he works in our marketing team. And my marketing team are desperate for us to find the money to buy a new website because our website, bless it, it's like a sturdy, very old workhorse that, keeps going but doesn't do anywhere near what we need it to do. But we literally haven't got the money for it. That's the point. And if we did have the money, we would choose to very efficiently spend it on making our website better so more people have access to our services. So I think, yes, of course, you're right. But using those ancient laptops is very rarely a choice in the sense of, it's like, oh, well, we could buy new laptops, but let's not. Let's just keep them going. It's more often a choice of, do we buy the new laptop or do we pay, that volunteer support worker to see those extra 5 people? Or do we not have the volunteer support worker and we buy a new laptop instead? So we're making really horrible choices all the time. And so inevitably inefficiencies are going to be built in the system, and especially because particularly smaller charities who rely on grants, or rely on contracts from government, you can't get the money for that stuff. No funder wants to pay for you to have new laptops. I mean, we've tried in the past of writing to fund and say, please, can you, give us some money to buy a new website? But they don't want to fund websites. They want to fund things that feel exciting and innovative, or about children or health or animals or what have you. So, I mean, I'm speaking with years of frustration, especially having set up the Small Charities Coalition, where, it's like more unrestricted funding from those who will give unrestricted, more trust, give us the freedom to spend the money that will help us to be more efficient. But I always say anyway, efficiency and effectiveness are not the same thing.
No,
people
completely.
Too often confuse them.
Yeah, I absolutely. And I think it's more than just words to, if one can reframe this conversation around impact and effectiveness, and how do we optimize the amount of resource we've got available to us to achieve the things we need to achieve in the next 12 to 24 to 36 months. That's what OXFAM are really trying to do. They haven't got anything like as much resource as they had before. No. They want to achieve as much as they can, and so how can they reframe, reshape?
Absolutely, but that will, because I don't believe for one moment that OXFAM has been wasting £16 million worth of money that they've got a shortfall of. So of course it's not just going to involve, of course it's going to involve having to cut back vital services because they need to survive. Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with their decision. I think you have to do it. I mean, they've got to survive. Yeah, and I think them there.
And I think in larger organisations, there's plenty of books written on all this sort of stuff, and this is the inner Treasury official coming out in me now. But I think it is reasonable to assume 2% a year, and this is before the tech changes that are coming forward now. If you can relate those to the outcome you're trying to achieve, I think it is reasonable to assume that for a reducing amount of resource, I'm saying 2% a year over time, it is possible to achieve the same impact if you're a nimble and agile organization, you're constantly thinking about this. Now, yeah, it's very difficult. If you're employing 2 people, you're essentially saying, well, we're cutting an arm off one of them.
Yes, exactly.
It's different when you're employing 1,000 people to when you're employing 1. But that maybe then does bring us back to the sort of how you, if you don't merge, how you work in coalitions and build your knowledge and understanding of other people who are working in the same space, so that charities can be really confident they're making the most distinct impact they can. And so I think one of the most powerful bits of research which we did in generating the last NSPCC strategy was getting really interested in what everyone else was up to. So that not only would we then not be treading on their toes, but they would be all the more appreciative of the particular things that we were doing. So that's definitely something I'd encourage in any kind of strategy development process, to look not just at what you are doing, but what others around you are doing. By the way, on free resource, did you see that the Henry Smith Foundation are donating resource to cover the national insurance increase?
I know. I was so impressed, Peter. I think I just commented, wow. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, I hope, because, despite our fears, not all charities are going to be affected at the same sorts of levels, because lots of them will either be very small impact or, more or less break even, because of course there are changes to the employer's allowance, which makes a big difference in lots of charities. So we're not as at DSC, we're not as impacted as we feared, because the employer's allowance is changing. I can't remember all the details of that, but there's plenty of information on our website, on Charity Finance Group website and stuff, for those who want to look at that. So I'm hoping is there is sort of, not entirely means testing, but they do sort of say to the charities, do you actually need, what is the gap?
Yeah.
So we don't want a winter fuel allowance thing where everybody's getting the same amount regardless of whether they actually need it or not. But I was super impressed by that approach. And I am seeing, encouragingly, more and more funders being braver and bolder and, more risk-taking and more kind of like, because all funders always talk about their partners and the people they partner with, and very, very rarely is it genuinely a partnership. It's we're giving you money, give us a report at the very least, and sometimes it's very restrictive. It's so wonderful to see some of these funders like, we're genuinely partners with you. Like, we've got the money, you've got the expertise. Let's work together to deliver the change that we want to see. And I really get a sense that Henry Smith, absolutely grasps that message. I mean, could not be more impressed.
I mean, as a funder, you have a shared interest in the money being spent really successfully, and to optimize the impact of it, don't you? I mean, I always felt in my time at what was then the Big Lottery Fund that actually we were there was quite a lot of positive feedback for grant management from the lottery relative to getting the money. The hard part was getting your application approved in the first place, because it was so competitive, and you've got to find ways of distinguishing one bid from another, and that can be extraordinarily difficult. But once you've got your kind of foot in the door and you can start having a different sort of conversation, then there is this kind of shared interest in achieving the best you can with the.
And you had a great structure for it as well, because, having all those regional and local grants officers, I think you called them, I can't remember, the job title may have changed now, but people who were in charge of the grants on the lottery's behalf, actually rooted in the communities where those grants were being given, I always thought was very, very good. And, you've got a sense from talking to local grants officers of the national big lottery fund, as it was then, national lottery fund or whatever, big community fund or whatever it is now, is how much they understood the issues that were affecting the charities in their area and how connected they were to what was going on.
Yeah, well, that was, of course, I was there at a time when the Big Lottery Fund was a merger of the New Opportunities Fund, which was a strategic kind of transformational grant maker.
I remember, because we campaigned against the merger at the time, Peter.
Right. Well, but delivering big sums of money to address big problems like times change.
Yeah.
And the community fund was very much, as you've described, regional offices, local grants officers working and understanding smaller charities. In the DSCs of this world would have loved the community fund more than they kind of probably admired the New Opportunities Fund back in the day. But bringing the two together, and the intention was to try and get the best of both worlds. But there were definitely some people who walked around with the community fund hat on, and others who were New Opportunities Fund types, just as for quite a long time there were people with NSPCC hats and Childline t-shirts. And this is one of the challenges of mergers. How do you keep the kind of distinct qualities which really matter, but make the best of what you've got? And the National Lottery Community Fund, it was an interesting name change. I always liked it being called the Big Lottery Fund, but I never knew any different. When I arrived, that's what it was already being called, and my job really was to try and help us all be together. But National Lottery Communities Fund, I think, did indicate a bit of kind of shift back to the more local rooted grant making. But it was good to see Dame Julia Cleverdon at the event last Thursday. I think she's an inspired choice as next chair of the National Lottery Communities Fund, and she was full of energy and ideas. So I look forward to seeing what they're going to be doing as a funder in the weeks and months ahead.
Well, I'm guessing you didn't notice what happened there, but I disappeared briefly from the... Yeah, and you lost me, so it's fine. Listeners, I'm just telling you, if there's a bit of a glitch in the thing, Peter was chatting away, I disappeared. That's because my lovely mother was FaceTiming me, and for some reason, when she FaceTimed me, it just cut off my Zoom connection. So I've just texted her to say, Mummy, please don't call me yet. I'm busily talking to, and she's just texted me saying, just remembered, sorry. So anyway, Peter was talking very eloquently. I just briefly disappeared, listeners. But actually, I wanted to come back to your thing about the New Opportunities Fund and the community fund, because actually our objection, but it's not that we preferred one over the other. Our objection at the time was we felt that by merging you'd lose the distinctiveness of each, and that it would all get washed up, because I absolutely believe in massive funds for big projects to make, and Time to Change did make a huge difference. And not only that, it led on to other things. That's the point. It was like the concept of it and that kind of notion of it led on to other stuff, didn't it? So it wasn't so much that, it was just about losing unique identity, which is what you just said, of course. And same happened when Volunteering England merged with NCVO. I mean, I said at the time, I understand why they did it, but I still think it was a mistake. And not because NCVO weren't completely committed to delivering volunteering, and they're still trying to do work on it. But if you speak to people in the sector and say, where would you go to for expertise on volunteering? They probably wouldn't say NCVO, but they would have said, Volunteering England. So, I think there's sometimes we lose something quite important when we merge in that way.
Yeah, maybe.
maybe. But anyway, life is basically a large experiment, isn't it? We try things, some things work, some things don't. Sometimes we try something, it doesn't work, and we try it again 10 years later, and lo and behold, it does work. I sort of think about change. I mean, I was honestly one of those very traditional, you all need to be into the office, that's how work works, you need to turn up at 9 and leave at 5 and all that kind of thing, until the pandemic, when I was literally forced by circumstances to change my mind and suddenly discovered actually flexible working is awesome. It makes people happier. It makes them more effective. It makes them more productive. And that, working remotely, which we had to do again, you can make it work fantastically like we have at DSC. So sometimes there's a word for it, isn't there, when a change is forced upon you and it creates new possibilities. Who knows? Maybe this is what will happen with, the Trumpian view of geopolitics and economics and all the rest of it, she says, laughing.
Yeah, well, there certainly have been, if people weren't talking about what was happening on the cricket field at Taunton over the weekend, they were comparing notes with one another as to how much their pensions had lost in the last week to 10 days. So certainly, yeah, there's been quite a readjustment, hasn't there, in the last few days, and no doubt those with the most money will have the best chance of surviving it. But yeah, challenging times.
Yeah, my already terrible pension at the moment is already set to be even worse. I'm going to be working till I'm 80, Peter. Anyway, I think we've probably done for this week, haven't we?
Yeah. So what we're going to do next week, listeners, is that we're going to do a Q&A session. So if you've got any questions that you'd like to put to Debra and me about the charity sector, about leadership, about things we think we've done well or less well, then let us know. That'll be a kind of special, and we'll look forward to answering your questions and seeing you next week.
Yes, thanks a lot, listeners. See you next week. Bye.
Bye.